Good morning, everybody. This is the session on client-centric remittances. We're going to talk about how to achieve a migrant-smart, gender-inclusive product design for remittance services. Let's just wait for people to come in. Okay, I see a lot of people coming in. Yes, we're ready. We're looking forward to this, so let's kick it off. Okay, so welcome to this panel on client-centric remittances. We're delighted that the European Microfinance Week this year has dedicated a series of 3 sessions on remittance services, which, as many of us know, is the backbone of many families' resilience around the world. My name is Ayako Iba. I'm the focal point for migration and remittances at MFR, and I'm honored to present to you our guest speakers today. There's Saskia Bosenberg, the gender lead of the migration and remittances team at UNCDF, together with Babette Lind, the marketing and partner relationship manager at Ping. In this time we have together, we will build up on the previous sessions on remittances and discuss why client-centric product design for remittances services is important and how we can achieve it. By the end of this session, we hope that the role remittances have in the wider financial inclusion ecosystem will be evident, and that many of you will also have found our discussion on client-centric product design applicable for other financial services. With no further ado, I'd like to welcome Saskia to the panel and ask why UNCDF cares about remittances and what type of work you do in this realm.
Thanks so much, Ayako, and the organization for inviting us and having us here. It's really a delight to have this conversation. And if you could go to the next slide, Ayako, I just want to share with you a few slides on what it is that we do. And to answer your first question, the reason why we care about this is because, well, we see that at the moment, financial services, including remittances, really do not work for men and women on the move. And considering the contribution of remittances to many economies in terms of value, but also in terms of development, a sustainable development, etc., we really would like to contribute to creating financial services that actually do work for men and women on the move, and not just to be able to send money from A to B without hassle, but also in a way that goes beyond remittances and that actually helps build resilience. And how we do that, we focus on improving both access and improving usage. And if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So we take a holistic approach in doing that. We focus on the policy and regulatory side. We focus on inclusive innovation, and that's actually the point where I wanted to zoom in on today, is where we work with financial institutions to help them develop and design more migrant-centric and gender-inclusive customer journeys. So that is both on the product side, but also all the other aspects that comes with it, and also to start thinking about or designing, implementing other financial services, including pensions, insurance, etc. Another part of our work is really on the customer empowerment side. So we are supporting both governments and financial institutions to help empower migrants and their remittance recipients to adopt formal and digital financial services. And here we look at, of course, building skills, literacy, digital literacy, but also enhancing the control people have over how and to whom they send, in what way, having choices to do or using different channels, and also being able to express their voice and being heard in terms of complaints, etc. And we're working on the interoperability side, creating open payment ecosystems. And the way we do that is, on the one hand, through applying customer-centric and a gender lens. That's systematically mainstreaming all our work. We do a lot of supply side and demand side research because surprisingly, there is very limited data actually available. We do stakeholder engagement. We offer TA, technical assistance, training, capacity development, and de-risking financial institutions. So this is kind of what's on our menu. And what if you can go to the next slide. So we really see remittances as in transferring money from A to B and all that comes with it. What is very key is that migrants are actually a very unique customer segment. So because of their migration status, because of their family embeddedness, because of their specific circumstances, they are different than the regular customer, so to say. And we apply a gender lens in understanding what this customer needs, because we see that men and women, migrants or recipients, can experience different barriers. And in order to create successful customer journeys for them, and we believe those are in the formal space and digital, we need to take this into account. So what we do is we work with financial institutions to help them apply a migrant and gender lens in every step of the way. That is in the data collection, in the market research, a product strategy development, their marketing, outreach, and also designing non-financial services. And then if you can go to the next slide. For us, two key questions are super important. How can we improve innovation to ensure that these digital remittances actually reach these last mile customers? And to what degree can the shift from informal to formal digital actually contribute to financial resilience? And that's why, if you can go to the next slide, Ayako. Thank you. That's why we do a series of data collection and research, because for us that is really the starting point of doing migrant-centric, gender-inclusive remittance development. So we do market scans, we look at transaction data, of course disaggregated by sex or age corridor, etc. We're implementing a large survey, we're doing qualitative research in order to build the personas and understand where in the customer journeys do men and women migrants experience pain points. What is it that they actually need, and what they had that they want when they remit or when they receive? And all of this is feeding into a human-centric design process that we are developing with the financial service providers that we support. And then lastly, I wanted to share with you a couple of learnings, insights that we really see emerging already. And the first one is that doing migrant-centric remittances is really about taking a relational and a contextual approach. And we see, for example, in the behavior of the sender, that the choices that this sender makes is very much interlinked with the circumstances and the needs of those that receive. So, for example, if in a country, a woman that is sending remittances and she would love to do that digitally and formally, etc. But if the person, usually a woman on the other side, is not able for many reasons to receive in that way, she will not choose to use those channels. So that is where we see this contextuality at play. Also, we see in transaction data, but also in the qualitative research, that women customers can have different behaviors when sending or receiving than men, because of specific barriers or specific circumstances and needs, and they often want a different experience with financial services. So you really need to take a different approach there, and a gender smart. Otherwise, unintentionally, you will be designing in a way that is excluding them. And lastly, we are convinced that doing it right, digital remittances can be an on-ramp for financial inclusion of men and women on the move. And that's where I'll stop and hand over to you, Ayako.
Great, thank you, Saskia. I think your presentation of the work UNCDF does with migrants and remittances clearly set the tone to this panel about how pivotal the focus should be on migration and also the gender lens. So without taking any time for Babette, I'd like to hear from you about Ping, if you could introduce us your company. And I understand it is also a startup, so it would be interesting to understand how it all began, what led the founders to launch this company.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for that introduction, Ayako. And also I'm delighted to be here today as part of this discussion. So as a co-founder of Ping, we're also called Ping Money. We ourselves are Gambian migrant remittance senders. And we really understand what's important from a migrant sender perspective because of our true first-hand experience. And what I want to be able to transfer money without paying extortionate fees. I want to be able to get the best rate on the market. I want to be able to use a service that is reliable and accessible on the go. And in addition to that, I want the best for my recipient, and I want something that will work for them in terms of how they collect the money, where they go, how far it is to get there, do they need identification, and so on. So before we launched Ping, we found that the Western Unions and the MoneyGrams out there were just too expensive and generally have quite low exchange rates in comparison to other Gambian-owned services, which will be cheaper and offer better rates, but I would say were too cumbersome. And, well, you would have to contact them directly sometimes to ask what the exchange rate was. You would have to transfer money into their bank account or give them card details over the phone to process a payment. And then you would have to call up your recipient and ask them to write down transaction details and so on. And another difficulty with these companies was also the customer service aspect. It would be really hard sometimes to get a hold of someone, or you would be met with impatience. And sometimes you'd have to wait for days for an issue to be resolved, which would be extremely stressful, not just for me as a sender, but also for my receiver who's expecting and depending on that money. And so these were the questions we were asking ourselves. We were asking, why can't we find a service that can offer the best of both worlds? A service with low fees, good exchange rates, easy to use on the go, accessible, that gives us a really good and friendly and decent customer experience. And so I would say that those are the questions that Ping was built upon. That is what we offer. And we continue to develop the service with the user need in mind. We launched about 2 years ago now, and we've been growing at a steady, I would say, organic rate. Our typical customers are Gambian economic migrants. They send money back home very regularly, mainly to support family, to save, or to invest in property. And I would say that our clients typically develop a very intimate relationship with their money transfer providers and often also become huge advocates if you offer them a good service, because they depend on you so frequently to ensure that their family get what they need when they need it. I would say that about 80% of our growth is word of mouth purely. I would say also that we want to give users exactly what they need in a way that works for them, bearing in mind the receivers. They're just as important. And we find that they actually have more of a say around how they want to receive their funds, which actually influences the choices that senders are making. And before I end, I'll just tell you a little bit about what we offer. At the moment, we offer money transfers for cash collection to the Gambia and Senegal. We offer bank deposit transfers and bill payments, such as prepaid electricity and airtime. And we also offer wallet transfers to Senegal and want to extend or expand this offering to our Gambian customers through a remittance-focused wallet that we are currently in development of in support of the UNCDF. And I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Great, Babette. No, great. Yes, you touched upon fees, which, as we know, is also part of the SDG effort to reduce them for 2030, and also customer service. And what best than you yourselves who have to go through the experience of sending remittances with other channels, right? Well, great. So I think that thank you so much to my colleagues for the great introduction. And I think this is a good moment to actually take a step back and present where remittances come in the wider financial inclusion ecosystem. So allow me to share the ecosystem. Here we go. So through my work at MFR, which, as many of you know, is an international independent evaluator that promotes transparent and responsible practices across the sector, I've had the pleasure to work with microfinance institutions, mobile network operators offering mobile money services, and also the pay-go solar sector, amongst others. And what I noticed is that oftentimes we conceptualize financial health at the household or enterprise level, meaning within a specific local context. And even in countries where remittance inflow is a significant share of its GDP, many financial service providers and investors will think of remittances as that informal, unstable, cash-based income that target clients receive. And for example, maybe just limit to taking it into account during the loan repayment capacity analysis, right? So this diagram aims to depict the financial inclusion ecosystem in a holistic manner and to demonstrate how financial inclusion takes place at the global level when we take into account all types of financial services that people use in order to meet their everyday expenses and to invest in their future. Especially when we focus on populations with the highest level of vulnerability and financial inclusion, what we see is that resilience is built at the extended family level. So we're referring here to economic migrants and refugees, which could be struggling to meet already for themselves. So with this dynamic in mind, I'd like to turn back to Saskia and ask, what has UNCDF observed about the behavior of the senders and the receivers of remittances?
Yeah, thanks. It's so, that diagram or that picture is so spot on, because it shows the complexity of things. And also bearing in mind that a lot of the channels that migrants use to send money is still in the informal space, or is in this gray zone where informal meets the formal, and so that there is there is a complexity to this matter that, well, is very interesting, but is also important to take into account. And on your question, what we observe on the choices that people make is that, well, if the Ping also mentioned it, we we learned in one of our researches that one of the most important things is that people want to know if and when the money arrived. Did it get there? Apparently, that is very difficult to, that is the intransparency that Babette also talked about. And the reason why people migrate is so that they can find employment somewhere else to earn money to send back to their families or others, because people seriously depend on that. And if you do not know where those that receive that money or that are waiting for that money to come through, if you do not know if that's happening, imagine the stress and the and we've heard horrible stories what can happen in the meantime. So and that's I think Babette said it very well as well, is that the channels that the sender is using or is able to access is very much related to the way the person that is receiving can actually receive. If you are sending to somebody, to a woman in Nepal who is unable to pay the money for the bus to go to the next town where there is a cash agent, for example, it will be difficult for her to get there. Or if she is unable to, or if she's not literate enough to fill the form to collect the money, etc. So there can be a lot of hurdles in between that make receiving money difficult, impossible, a hurdle, intransparent. And I also wanted to mention a practice that we have observed. This is a story, and Babette, I'm sure you can tell more about it, but we see, for example, also issues of price confusing, which is affecting women, because we know there is a gender gap in digital and financial literacy, where service providers intentionally create a lot of fuss around what the price is or how the price is structured, which makes it difficult for people to make a decision on it. And if you have earned €100 and you need that €100 to be with your family, but you do not know if it's going to be 75, or if you do it tomorrow, if it's going to be 65, but you know your mother needs that €100, yeah, that is, yeah, we really want to change that.
Okay, yeah, no, it's very interesting that transparency is something that is really important also to make sure and that there's a certain level of quality in the customer service offered by the remittance service providers. And this is something that also other stakeholders in the financial inclusion sector can appreciate and have experienced. So Babette, since you have first-hand experience with the customers of Ping and receive direct client feedback, I'm sure on a daily basis, what have you witnessed in Ping regarding these dynamics at the sending and the receiving end, if you could shed light?
Yeah, thank you so much. And Saskia, that is such an important point that you're raising in relation to cost and pricing transparency. It just brings to mind actually an example. So we, that is key to what we do, being completely transparent in what, the receiver will, you'll immediately know if there is a fee. However, we operate a zero fee transfer service for cash pickups. But we try to be completely transparent about the costs and how much the sender will receive and so on. And we're sort of a zero fee policy. But in terms of, we try to take every opportunity to educate wherever possible a little bit our customers, and we regularly send out newsletters and communications and so on. And an example is of the effect firsthand that this has had is that in one of our newsletters we had a little tip sections to just very clearly break it down to say, do you know that you can send money straight into your own bank account in the Gambia if you've got one? And if you send, for example, yourself £100 into your bank account based on today's exchange rate, and you do that over 12 months, this is the amount in $C you'll end up with, in 12 months time. And that little communication with that clear breakdown, we saw an immediate increase in bank deposits being done, and actually by females, following that communication in that month. So that is really interesting. And we try to work in a way where we take every opportunity to sort of, I guess, educate, support in that sense, wherever we can. And then going back to the other part of this discussion, I guess, so I'd just like to point out, I guess, the significance of remittance inflows on GDP. In the Gambia, remittances account for 23% of GDP, and this is significant. So the dependency on remittances can't be overstated here, And in the mind of a migrant, being able to provide for your family, especially being based abroad, is almost something that's part of your fabric. It's expected of you, but you also expect it of yourself in turn, and you take pride in it. And in many ways, I would say that it's every economic migrant's mission. But just to be clear, I am speaking of Gambians now from firsthand experience. I'd also like to, I'll go back to my example around cost and exchange rates and the difference it makes for the sender receivers, because of an increased awareness now around the value for money. And senders to Gambia, they are slowly moving away from the likes of Western Union and MoneyGram and moving towards services like ours, because we offer cost savings of around 75%. On average, our transfers cost the senders 4 to 5%. And another key thing to highlight is the difference that sending fees made. I just touched upon it, but really, a sending fee of £5 versus £0, it's just significant. That £5 can buy a week's worth of prepaid electricity, for example. So, yeah. And it. So if I have another few seconds, I'll just touch on an example of how receivers having more of a say in how they receive their money has impacted us directly. So we started with a bank as a payout partner, but we quickly got feedback from senders that the recipients weren't happy because the queues were very long. They could sometimes be in a queue in a bank for 1 to 2 hours, just waiting to collect their cash. And that made us quickly sort of rethink our strategy. And now we've partnered up with FX bureaus, and they don't have hardly any queues. They have a wider reach and a bigger presence. And so that's now working really well for our recipients. I'll stop there for now.
Wow, Babette, thank you. With this kind of just open discussion between us, we're creating the client journey map, right? From sender to receiver. And this is just amazing. Well, so it is clear that it is important to take into account the migrant aspect, and also that there's a gender perspective that needs to be evident, because there are gaps and differences between men and women. So Saskia, I come back to you and I dare ask you $1 million question, which is, how does a migrant-smart, gender-inclusive product design for remittance services look like?
Yeah, that is indeed the $1 million question. And so to answer that question, or maybe rephrasing, how do you recognize an inclusive or migrant-centric remittance customer journey, so to say? It is very much about the process itself, on how that product came about, or that customer journey, and of course the product or the journey itself. And also building on what Babette just said, I think, well, first of all, it is very much designed around what migrants need and aspire, what they want to do with their money. And therefore we see sex disaggregated data or age disaggregated data across corridors, etc. There are very interesting differences across or between corridors in different countries, because also levels of gender equality or inclusion in society also differ across countries. So that is very important, is that you understand based on customer data what that customer needs and wants. And then another aspect that I think is very important, and what we see Ping doing, is that you design around gaining the trust of your customer while also building the confidence. And what I find so interesting, and where I see Ping being an example of a new generation of remittance service providers, is that is where traditionally I think a lot of these business models were designed around the fee and how to make the most money out of that process, which in essence doesn't cost anything, but there's a lot of costs created there, and that's where the money is being made. And what we see now is that there is a new a whole new market emerging, where they say, no, the customer is not some passive end recipient, but we put that customer at the core of our business model. And then you see that there is actually also a business in thinking about value addition and what other type of services does this customer actually need. And I think that's where there is interest also for the financial sector, and where the inclusive innovation takes place. And a third point where I would recognize a gender inclusive migrant-smart product is also mentioned by Babette, is that you actually engage with other relevant actors or stakeholders and do this in partnership, and figure out in that particular ecosystem what's the matter, what can we do to improve that. For example, on digital literacy or financial literacy, there's plenty of actors out there who are working on that, and how can you as a financial service provider partner up with those institutions to build that.
Indeed. In fact, Babette's example about your initiatives of financial literacy, actually, it was customer service, right? It's just that it was financial literacy transformed into customer service. It was a win-win, I would say. So, Babette, keeping this migrant and gender perspective in mind, what have you observed in terms of your clients' needs and main pain points, both always at the sender and the receiver end?
Yeah, so I think if we think about the sender, this is something that Saskia touched on early on in the discussion, and that is the ability to have a level of control around how your money is received and spent. And so we've received direct feedback from our senders. We did a recent survey, and 50% of them said that it was important that they had some level of control. And this is where prepaid electricity is a prime example. We have customers that solely use our service just for that purpose, regularly, every month, like clockwork. And they also want to be able to pay for things like medication, hospital bills, school fees, government taxes, and other things, in order to be able to be reassured that the money has gone where it was intended to go. And another key challenge and a major pain point for some is the challenge we're experiencing in around being able to cater for all migrants, especially those that are undocumented, who might be in receipt of a small income that they want to share with their family back home, but there is an issue of sometimes lack of identification altogether, which complicates the KYC process and onboarding them onto our service. And in some cases, those users will be altogether reluctant to complete their registration in fear of being exposed as undocumented. And these are then the people that will take huge risks in sending back their money through informal channels where there's the potential of losing the money altogether. And a pain point on the receiver side, again, we've touched on this, but examples are distances to travel to collect cash, physical cash, which can also often be quite bulky, depending on the amount, and might need to be carried in a separate bag. And with that, you're exposed to being stolen from or being robbed. And this is where our remittance-focused wallet option has become a priority as a solution, but also, to enable financial inclusion. And if I can just quickly add, I'd just like to add that in terms of the gender dimension discussed, we feel that gender-centric products, I agree with Saskia, need to heavily involve gender-centric research and input by the end users. I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, thank you, Babette. Indeed, I think you reminded me that the challenge with being migrant smart is that migrant status is dynamic. That's the meaning of the word. You can be undocumented for N months, but it doesn't depend on you, it depends on the government, and it doesn't mean that you'll be undocumented for life. But then the need to send money back home to your family persists. So we don't have much time left, unfortunately, but last but not least, we'd really like to touch up on the digital aspect also, because Ping is a fintech and UNCDF also works with a lot of fintechs in this area. So coming back to you, Saskia, what do you think is the role of the digital in remittance services? And most importantly or interestingly in this conference, how can the digital help link remittances to other financial services?
Yeah, the digital, as I said earlier, we really see that as an on-ramp for financial inclusion for this group, is that digital makes it faster, makes it safer, makes it more transparent. So the issue of control is really, really important there. And once you have people on a digital highway or in a system, yeah, imagine there's a lot of other things you can offer or provide for them, like Babette is saying, on that there is the need to send money from A to B, but there's also a need to pay electricity bills, or think about having a pension, or being able to get insurance or get a mortgage. All these financial products are not available to people on the move because of their migration status, because of identification problems, etc. And very often they just do not have formal access to the financial or to services in the country where they work or of their residence. So there is and once you get them to use digital channels, then you can easily link other products to that as well.
Sure, thanks. Babette, so in your experience at Ping, why does being digital matter? And could you also provide some examples about the benefits that the digital brings to the clients?
Yeah, sure. So for us, being digital was our goal from the onset, and making our digital accessible, that is the mission, I guess I would say. And with that, we found that we were at a huge advantage when the COVID pandemic hit, for example. Not only did the remittances to the Gambia surge, but people were forced, more or less, to use formal remittance channels, and so being digital was just the right thing, at that time, the time of self-isolation, when that was mandatory and there were limited movements enforced all across the world. So you know, from an operational perspective, it's been a huge advantage. But the other key aspect for us is the convenience that it offers customers, the ease of managing their money, and the digital footprint that comes with that, which, going back to what Saskia was saying, which will enable us to look at developing further options, like, for example, short-term loans based on a remittance profile, right? But having said that, digital also comes with its challenges. When you think about migrant senders, and you think about IT literacy and financial literacy in relation to sender receivers based on, you often think about those based in developing countries, right? And you can easily forget that there's a large proportion of economic migrant senders based in Western countries. Just because they have smartphones or access to digital services doesn't necessarily mean that they don't experience issues around using digital products. So, you know, we've come across clients that, despite our efforts to make our digital platform as simple and as easy to use as possible, they still struggle. They still want to give us a call before they make a transfer to check what the rate is, or, you know, can we pay by a manual bank transfer, and so on. And these are the clients that need that extra TLC, that extra care, that extra time, really. And we recognize that, and we make sure that we give them that. And as I was saying before, these are the moments where we also take every opportunity to try and educate and empower them by being supportive and patient and dedicating time to talk them through how to do something step by step. I've personally spent 30 minutes or more with some female clients in particular that have said, I'm very embarrassed, I don't know how to do it, I'm trying, but I keep getting stuck. You know, I'm not IT savvy. Oh, you're so patient. I'm so sorry. And, you know, I'll just say, it's okay. We'll do it together. I'll talk you through it. And next time you'll know how to do it. And you realize it's actually really simple and there's nothing to it. And this will help you in the digital world that we live in. And 9 times, you know, most of the times they are so appreciative, they feel empowered, and it's a golden opportunity for us to look at why didn't they understand what was working and how can we improve that aspect. But it's also about recognizing what works for them digitally, which is a huge advantage. So making things available like WhatsApp, for example, which is so popular and widely used amongst Gambians. That has helped us as a tool in terms of customer care and customer support. You know, you can leave or receive voice notes, you can interact with the customers by sending screenshots or screen recordings when you want to show them how to do something, etc. And that has worked really well. So there is more. I know we're running out of time. I wanted to go in a little bit around the interoperability and the difficulties around that, particularly in developing countries. But I will leave it at that because I know we're short on time. Thank you.
Okay. Well, in fact, interoperability is a crucial point, and I think it's interesting to talk about it also from this client-centric point of view. So please take the last minute to talk about it, indeed.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Well, I guess the only point I was trying to make is that, particularly on the receiver side, so the challenges there are illiteracy. There can also sometimes be a lack of trust in digital platforms, and basically the lack of interoperability definitely reduces the overall incentive for customers, you know, to go digital, and it reduces the ability for users to send and receive money from anyone that is outside of that sort of closed loop system, and it limits the number of places where users can cash in and cash out. To keep it brief, so yeah, that is a challenge that needs to be overcome.
Of course.
So there's a lot of work involved there, and a lot of, again, collaboration and partnering and getting governments on board
No, in fact, we understand that it's a much large scale challenge that has to be tackled not only by practitioners, financial service providers, but regulators and the governments and the central banks indeed. So we're closing the session, but we're more than happy if the audience would like to ask any questions. In the meantime, I think that I'd like to share some concluding remarks from what I learned from our speakers today. We've learned that the sender and receiver behaviors are deeply interlinked. How the sender behaves and is related to the receiver and vice versa. The migrant dimension is important and that it is also dynamic. So being migrant smart means understanding the dynamic character of these people on the move. We also understood that the gender gap manifests also within the digital and the financial literacy gap that is found, and that perhaps these digital and financial literacy gaps are different, whether we're talking about the sender population or the receiver population. And at last, that the digital aspect is important to link remittance services to other financial services because it makes the money flow more secure and it allows for more control for the customers. But that in fact, the customers, for what matters to them the most is trust, and the challenge of interoperability is ongoing because if there's trust, if there's interoperability, then the trust can be gained to make best use of these linked financial services. Would there be any final remarks that Saskia and Babette would like to make to share with the audience today?
My final remark, and I think Babette should have the final word actually. My final remark is that we see the discussion, but also the market opportunity and the development opportunity around remittances gaining a lot of traction. And we are very happy with that because it's very, very needed. So this, I think, is the beginning of a larger discussion that I hope we're going to have in the coming years together, including with the microfinance sector. I think that is very important that we jump on board on this trend and this discussion of making remittances and financial services work for migrant men and women.
Well said. And I think for me, my final remark would just be going back to what I was just finishing on, which is that as a collective, we should push for governments to put the right policies in place to help fintechs and MFIs and mobile money operators, banks, and so on to be creative and to collaborate to develop services and products that drive the financial and gender inclusion forward.
Great, Babette. What a concluding remark. Well, thank you so much to my dear colleagues for this panel session, and thank you to the audience for following us on this remittance session. We really hope that the audience will keep on participating and joining us on future discussions ahead on remittances within the bigger realm of financial inclusion. Thank you.